And you all can take a seat. I definitely have some questions following that presentation. So I see some coming up on screen.io, but I'm going to go ahead and start with one of my own, which is how much do you see the work that's going on in Finland as being able to connect to other global systems? I heard some mentions to a reason why this kind of thing would work well in Finland is because there is high levels of trust with the government, but do you see these as systems that can connect to systems in other countries? In this open question.
Start.
At least, yeah, the companies that come here are very connected by their nature, that having a small home market, domestic market, means that once you open your startup garage door, there's just 1.5 meters of snow in front of it and nothing else, that you kind of need to go global, need to go to other markets quite soon. And that connection, I feel strengthening all the time, that we see more foreign investment coming here, more involvement directly with Europe and US. And many of the people that are kind of my technological entrepreneur peers, they have been building companies with this kind of mindset for a long time. So at least there's that. But the one connection that we still need to make is that Finland doesn't really have limited partners who are foreign entities investing into Finnish VC funds or funds that operate in this area yet. So we are seeing a lot of like US business angels making investments and foreign VC funds making investments, but we are yet to see foreigners investing money into the funds themselves as limited partners who operate here. So that's one of the things that the ecosystem still lacks, and one connection that we need to build. But other than that, it's easy to operate from here also, because the open source movement is part of our history. Things like the Linux, IRC chat, all of these things have come from here. And there are a long history of sharing the work with open source, with soft standards, with including everybody basically. So that at least we have a long history of doing.
If I had to pick 3 areas of activity where what Finland is doing might have a universal impact, I would definitely pick up healthcare, transportation, mobility as a service, one example, and then third sector would be my favorite, energy. And if you look at the European market, specifically Nordics is a very similar environment, 80% the same, 30 million people, 10 million households. This bunch of people here up north is fully capable of really disrupting these 3 areas, and data will be the key common denominator.
Yeah, sorry, Jaana, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think in a way, if there's a digital single market, there should be a digital single market for data as well at the EU level, and I think that's something what we are trying to facilitate by now working with this IAN standard. You have a standard way of exchanging data, because that's the soil for something new.
Yeah. So piggybacking off of your comment, Taneli, that Finland has a rich history of creating open source technology, I'm wondering, do you see any tension there, especially as you're looking to form pathways for companies to potentially go public and get venture funding? Do you see a tension between being able to go public and still developing technology that's open source? And do you see technology, open source, as being inherent to systems like MyData working? Like, is that part of data portability? And the question that the person actually asked is, how much of the development output has to be open source and reusable by others to get funding from back end? I'm sure this applies also to funding from places like Sitra and Business Finland.
Yeah, at least we have no rules yet, so we don't know what the end result is going to be. But certainly many of the open source cases are really appealing if they have a business model also, how to use that element in there. And I think in open source, the most valuable contribution is not really the open source code itself. It's really the communities of developers and other sort of off-balance sheet market-based assets in a way that tap into that. And you can think of these companies who operate with the open source model play on its strengths, in a way they can arrive at a situation where the company is much, much stronger than you would realize by analyzing its financial statements, because they might have a massively good reputation, they might have a huge developer community backing up what they're doing, and it's these kind of things that I think completely positively fit together with aspirations of investors also to fund these kind of cases, and how to pull this through, how to get MyData out there and make it happen to the fullest extent. It also needs this developer community feel, definitely. And open source is one of the very valid ways of how to get that, how to get it included, how to make it happen. So I think it comes close. Open source and MyData, they sort of logically come close to each other and might be a winning combination in many, many areas.
Yeah, and I would imagine some things that really sparked my interest when you were talking was the idea that to do a lot of these like autonomous machine learning systems and this deductive reasoning, you need access to that pool of data. And kind of how do you manage that in a way that's secure and still correlated around an individual so that you can make those reasonings, but doesn't violate that person's privacy or security.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And there are things that the open source movement and the whole developer communities in the tech side can definitely contribute when it comes to machine learning and applying the AI algorithms on things like MyData. That we have wonderful examples out there right now that there's ImageNet, this available resource originally fully meant for academic research purposes that has all sorts of classified images, like this is what a car looks like, this is what a fence looks like, this is a lamp post, and many, many AI image recognition software PCs nowadays, they use ImageNet as the basis for training the AI algorithms on how to recognize different objects. There's also such a thing as a ShapeNet, so 3D shapes and LiDAR scanned images of different shapes, which is the same thing. It's a massive database of different kind of shapes. And I could easily imagine that in MyData, what the open source community could create is this sort of human behavioral net. So same as ImageNet or ShapeNet, it's HumanNet, and it would include a large database of models that are archetypal sort of human behavior. So this is what a tired person looks like. This is what a person looks like when they exercise too much. This is what a person looks like, or what the pattern of a person looks like when they are going into financial trouble, for example. Models like this, and that kind of contribution to create a huge data set of these kind of behavioral patterns of people, and then train that on the algorithms and have the algorithms detect those patterns from my data sets would be immensely valuable. And for example, this is very, very hard to do by any one company, but it's some of the things that open source communities repeatedly do. They get that done.
Yeah. There's a few questions that I think are all kind of in a similar theme, so I'm going to highlight them all, which is basically questions about funding and how people apply for funding and investments. There's a question, how do we apply for funding from VACA? How does Business Finland support companies? And then some questions getting to this idea of how can you use public sector funding in a way that promotes rather than stifles innovation. And I would be interested, because that's something that I think is unique here, is there's a lot of like public-private partnership going on. How do you kind of scout out talent and foster an industry in a way that still leaves the field open for innovation? So I can start, I guess, how does Business Finland give support?
There's 4 government-backed organizations on the stage, and just to make it clear, Business Finland only funds projects and products and development that has got a global scalability opportunity. We don't fund anything that's only Finland market related. And we really want to have the export income coming to the country and enabling the new jobs to evolve in our country. And we have a 600 strong organization doing the screening, and of course we get our hands dirty in terms of finding the right ones to fund. And we truly believe that this can only happen via facilitating and really setting the ecosystems around great ideas on fire. And this definitely, since there's no company on the planet that would be capable of handling the need of speed in development on R&D, we really need to have organizations like ourselves to do the match and act as a gearbox between the departments of defense, for example, in certain countries, and Taneli, the startup in our country. If you put them discussed together just alone, leave them there, nothing's going to happen. Somebody needs to facilitate the thing.
Yeah, and I would say that's something that the public sector can do well. Obviously, we had brought up the idea that MyData being a younger sector and a newer concept, and something that's based on kind of having this infrastructure ecosystem layer, it can be hard to get it going, but doing programs within a government sector means you can make something happen quite quickly. And something that I think is really interesting about Trafi's project is that you are focusing kind of on like the user side, the consumer side, like how can a person have this on their phone and use it? So I was wondering, what were some main takeaways from the license pilot? Did you find that people thought it was useful to have this thing, that it like improved their lives to have a MyData thing for their driver's license?
Well, the pilot is still going on, so we'll probably get more results by the end of the year. But yeah, I think many people find it very useful. It's just now a mobile driving license, and then there is the vehicle services. But maybe Trafi works as a public authority, and we do the services that we have to do as a public authority. But then we have the pilot with Tilaajavastu, and it's the similar data, and we can have the companies doing or other public sector organization together, and maybe there will be more efficient services to the people, and we can connect to kind of databases and have more human-centric services. So we have had very good results, and people have liked it, and we have many ideas how develop the service in the future. But I think the answer is to combine our data to others' data and then making a better service.
Yeah, and I would imagine that definitely gets into like MyData and consent technologies and data portability. Did you find a way in your development that you felt like you could get consent from people to get the data back that you were collecting?
Well, as a public authority, we can get the data even they don't consent it, so it's easy to use for the mobile driving license the data. But in the case of Tilaajavastu, there we need the consent to get the data from us, and that's one thing that we need is this MyData operators, because the public authority cannot collect the consents and to all kind of services. So that's one field that we have to have more operators on.
Do you foresee, I know there's been some work using the X-Road protocols to pass data back and forth between the Estonian government services and now potentially hooking up to Finnish government services. Do you see something like this driver's license being something that people could take with them and use in another country and keep the data there?
Hopefully one day, yes. And even now we are exchanging data between the European countries with this driver license and vehicle information. So it's already there, but it's not in an application. It's just in interfaces between the countries. So.
Right, so you could still potentially have the data come out on an API of some kind, and
yeah.
That remains to be done. Yeah, and Jaana, I want to find out more about IHAN and kind of what's the state of the project now, because I know there had been a project coming before it Isaacus, where there was some kind of a data pool happening of health data in Finland. How does IHAN differ from being a data pool, and how do you think it could eventually help people get their health data and services in other countries?
Yes, this Isaacus project is backed up by the legislation, the new legislation from the government on the secondary use of healthcare data, and that's sensitive data. And of course there are rules how to use that data. It's anonymous, it needs to be in a safe environment, it's pseudonymized. That's now in the parliament, so we are expecting it to be in effect this year. And then there's lots of information that you need to have your consent. If you think about your lifestyle data, smart cities data, all data that's related to your lifestyle or situation, that's sensitive data. So that's why we need to, if we want to expand the amount of data, not just governmental registries, but also this individual data, person data, to be available for use for well-being services, development of well-being services, we think that it needs to be consent-based. But then there's governmental actions like this personal health register, the Omakanta, which is going to be the official kind of store for this personal healthcare data. The idea with the IHAN is more like creating this consenting layer and a methodology to follow up what happens with your data. So, as I said earlier, we are not planning to create any data stores. It's up to the service providers to apply to rules and regulations and making sure that data is handled in the right way.
Yeah, do you see any possibility of potentially using blockchain technology to do this kind of data exchange layer? I know I had talked also in the podcast to Dr. Adrian Gropper, who's working with patient privacy rights in the US, that's trying to do like giving patients more control over their own health data, and they're looking very seriously at blockchain tech. And I was wondering if that's kind of like where things are moving in terms of secure transfer of that kind of level of personal data.
Yeah, so far the idea has been like using blockchain only for logging, creating the transparency and making it visible who has been, how was my consent to what data sources, what happened with the data, when did I cancel the consent and what happened, who were the service provider and what timestamp. Those kind of things. So it's more like a logging layer. But as I said, we are looking for prototyping and trying to find those right projects to prove how the technology could look like in the final requirements. Like an end result for this IHAN standard would be most probably like a functional requirements or technical requirements of the standard. So yeah. Practical experiments and then some paperwork. That's an actual outcome from our project. But then when I saw one question there about Vake's role and Sitra's role, so Sitra, we always fund a public-private partnership project, so there's a public partner, and then de minimis is the way for us to fund companies. But what we've been discussing is that maybe if we fund now quite easily the prototyping phase in this human-driven data economy, try to create a test bed in Finland and then ask companies to work and try it out. Then maybe Vake could be the next phase and scaling up what we are now testing the first phase. So I think it's a very good opportunity for Finland to align all the funding instruments and different actors working from different angles.
Yeah. I was thinking, watching the Business Finland video, especially in terms of driver's license, there were a lot of autonomous vehicles in different autonomous systems that were happening there. I know that Finland had piloted some kind of universal basic income project. Do you see, if we really move to this kind of like utopian vision that could potentially happen, for a MyData system and you have all these kind of like autonomous systems, do you think universal basic income is something else that will have to happen to supplement the incomes of all the people who would be unemployed?
Absolutely. That's my personal view on this one. And there's a KPMG survey from June this year where all the Nordic countries were compared and interviewed. They interviewed thousands of CEOs in Nordic countries, and 80% of Finnish CEOs really think that AI will actually increase the number of jobs because it will be so dramatically boosting the productivity in those businesses so that they can retain the profitability of those companies and they are able to hire more people. That's exactly what we have been seeing happening over the last 3 years in our only car manufacturing plant at the city of Uusikaupunki. We started to implement first round of robots. 600 robots was brought into a factory of 800 workers 3 years ago. We've now run 4 rounds of robotization in collaboration with AI, and the number of jobs has gone to 4,500. Is this the kind of development we want to resist? I don't think so. And this is exactly what I want to see in other industries also happening in Finland, and I'm totally convinced that this is the way it's going to fold out for us Finns.
Yeah.
This universal basic income idea, I think it's worth investigating. However, it's mathematically really hard to get the level of basic that would be enough for people in the setting, especially if we do nothing with things like consumption taxes and other stuff that inflicts higher prices on the things that they would then use the income on. And you have to look at carefully how much of the old structures need to be dismantled for something like that to work, because it's basically all of them. All of the old structures, they need to go. And it is an interesting issue what's going to happen in a longer time span once we get technology affecting jobs. That I think that we need to deregulate away and dismantle all of these barriers that people have in different sorts of motivational traps and barriers to start a business, barriers to go and work on whatever you feel like. Basically make it as unregulated and as free as possible, including even things like if you want to do some crazy performances in liquid latex enhanced by unclassified hallucinogens, that would be like no license required, go ahead, free to do it. So up to the level that is really not legal now. So we would have to dismantle a lot of things to allow maximum freedom for people to basically work in whatever things they like to and be entrepreneurs in whatever field they like to. This kind of requirement I think is a must-have at some point, because work can't be as rigid and stationary as it is right now. Otherwise we will force a lot of people to not have any work. So that's an issue clearly.
Yeah, right now the type of work that people can have is dependent on the kinds of systems that have already been built up, and those are sometimes fairly entrenched. Would you all consider Finland a place that has a pretty high regulatory barrier to starting businesses?
Not necessarily new businesses as such. I think the labor market is much more rigid than, or business freedom is quite okay, but labor freedom here certainly isn't okay at the moment, and that's something that Finland needs to work on.
Can you describe a little bit what you mean by labor freedom?
That if you are a professional in some job, how much of your own terms can you set negotiating for yourself in the market? That right now it's very limited in here, that it's a lot of collective bargaining that becomes mandatory for everybody, completely irregardless if you want to participate in it or not. And sometimes in these heavier structures in the background, you end up creating barriers that it's not as easy for people to move and switch jobs and change professions and do 7 jobs at the same time and be an entrepreneur at the same time as they are employed by someone else. And it's these kind of structures that we need to make more free, more available, more options, more freedom to people to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
In other words, gear up to the gig economy.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Do we have any, I'm going to go in a minute to the Delta poll question to wrap up. Do we have any final comments or any questions that you have for each other? Cool.
Clear.
We are just welcoming everybody who's interested on the experiences and the development Finland is facilitating to join the party. There's a party going on related to MyData and artificial intelligence in this country, and you're warmly welcomed.
Yeah, thanks. All right, a big thank you to our panelists.